Thank you so much for joining us for today's book launch of Once There Was a Town, The Memory Books of a Lost Jewish World. My name is Sydney Yeager, and I'm the Senior Public Programs Producer here at the Museum of Jewish Heritage. Before we continue, please silence your cell phones and anything else that may make noise during the program. I would like to thank Jewish Gen for co-presenting today's program. Jewish Gen, the genealogical research division of the museum, has two important projects that are directly related to the topic of tonight's presentation. The Yisker book project was started about 40 years ago by a group of Jewish genealogists who pooled their resources to translate Yisker books from Hebrew and Yiddish into English and make them available on the internet. The translation project continues, and to date, over 200 Yisker books have been fully translated, and there are about 500 more books in various stages of completion. In 2012, a new project, Jewish Gen Press, was started to publish the fully translated books in print. Over 200 Yisker books have been published, and approximately 20 additional books are published each year. For more information, you can visit jewishgen.org. Today, we are honored to be joined by Jane Ziegelman. Jane is the author of 97 Orchard, an edible history of 5 immigrant families in one New York tenement, and co-author of the James Beard Award-winning A Square Meal. Jane will take questions near the end of the hour and will sign books after the program in the first floor lobby, where you can also purchase Once There Was a Town. So thank you so much again for joining us, and now I'm going to welcome Jane.
Hi. Hi, everyone. All right. To remember in Judaism is both a religious obligation and an act of piety. Whether it's lighting a yahrzeit candle or observing the Sabbath, Jewish life is filled with acts of remembering. And then we have the holidays, special times set aside to engage in intensive remembering. Think of Tisha B'Av, when Jews mourn for the destruction of the temple as if it happened yesterday, or Passover, when we're commanded to remember the story of the Exodus, not as a,
Bring this down a little bit.
bring it down, thank you, not as a remote historical event, but as if it happened to us, as if we were slaves in the land of Egypt. Yisker books, which is what we'll be talking about tonight, come out of this same tradition of remembering. The word Yisker is a form of the Hebrew verb to remember. Literally translated, it means may he remember. Yisker is the first word of a special memorial prayer in which we ask God to remember, may God remember the souls of our departed relatives. Both the Yisker prayer and Yisker books go back 1,000 years to medieval Germany and the Jewish communities that had formed along the Rhine River. It was the time of the Crusades, a campaign by the Christian West to recapture Eastern holy sites, the ultimate prize being Jerusalem. On their way to the Holy Land, Crusaders, fighting under the sign of the cross, decided to stop and kill Jews. The first in a chain of massacres took place in the city of Speyer. 12 were killed. Next was Worms, where 800 Jews lost their lives. In Mainz, 600 Jews lost their lives, many by suicide. The Rhineland massacres inspired new forms of remembering. On certain days of the year, memorials were held, when the names of those killed were read aloud in synagogue, each name introduced by a prayer, an early version of today's Yisker prayer. At a time when Jews were growing more and more concerned about the afterlife, memorials for the dead were thought to speed the soul of the dead to paradise. So if that was the goal for the dead, for the living, these memorials strengthen the bonds of memory that connect people to their past and to each other. The texts used in these services evolved into what are called Memorbucher, books documenting the sites of the various persecutions, along with a list of those killed, what's known as a necrology. And this necrology, this list of the dead, would go on to become a standard Yisker book feature. What's considered the first modern Yisker book was written in 1924. So before the Holocaust. It was written to commemorate a pogrom that took place in the town of Proskerov. It was the Holocaust, however, that fueled a creative surge involving tens of thousands of Jews spread out through the US, through Israel, South America, South Africa, and Australia. The result was hundreds of Yisker books, well over 1,000 in total, each book dedicated to a different town, or in Yiddish, shtetl. In the shtetl, an important site for remembering was the local cemetery. For reasons of Jewish law, all cemeteries were located outside the town proper, but not so far that you couldn't walk to them. And visits to the cemetery were a regular part of shtetl life through the year. However, it was the month before Yom Kippur, Day of Atonement, when traffic to the local cemetery became really heavy. This was when whole families went on cemetery outings. At gravesides, family members lit memorial candles and read chapters from the Book of Psalms. Parents introduced their children to their ancestors with stories of their many meritorious acts, which the children could then pass on to their own children, forming this chain of remembering. Jews killed in the Holocaust had either been incinerated, their ashes scattered, or thrown into pits. In either case, they had no graves, a fact which tormented their survivors, that their loved ones, Jews who had died as martyrs, were denied the honor of proper burial was a source of terrific anguish. But the greater tragedy, a Jew without a grave is at risk of being forgotten. Yisker books were written to serve as paper gravestones or literary gravestones. What I'm about to read is an excerpt from a 1967 Yisker book. It's for a town called Turbin, and it spells out this idea of the paper tombstone in very strong language. Here it is. Stop. We do not know where our nearest and dearest, the people murdered through the Nazi bandits, were buried. Be these memorial pages their graves and tombstones. Behold, you bereaved and orphaned. Behold and read their names as though you were now moving among their graves in the cemetery. Move slow and quiet. With the eye of your soul, try to live for a moment their lives. They look at you. Their glances are a memento. Remember them. Bear their image in your mind as a monument and in your heart and soul as well. Do not forget. Do not forget. Yisker books are very often referred to as memorial books, but I think of them more as memory books, or you could say memory anthologies. They are collections of essays, stories, memoirs, poems, correspondence, diary excerpts, all kinds of documents pertaining to the town that describe its history, its culture, and its eventual destruction. Key players in the making of these books were organizations that had formed decades before the Holocaust, starting in the late 19th century in cities like New York, in other words, in major immigrant cities. Jews from the same towns and landsmen, I'm is a word I'm assuming some people here know. So a Jew from the same town as your landsman, also known as landsleit, but in my family it was landsman. So these landsmen banded together to create mutual aid societies known as Landsmannschaften, organizations you could turn to in times of crisis. So if a family member was sick and couldn't work, these societies provided financial support. And when a family member died, they ensured a plot in a Jewish cemetery. After the war, it was these societies that assumed responsibility for writing the town Yisker book, memorials to vanished communities and a vanished way of life. Now, one of the idiosyncrasies of Yisker books is how much they tell us, their readers, about their own creation. They're very, I think of them as very self-conscious books, and certainly the people who produced them were very conscious of what they were doing and thought through the books in a very thorough and interesting way. So a lot of this information is, is up front. It's in a preface or an introduction written by the book's editor. And here are some of the things we learn. Well, we learn, for example, that writing a Yisker book was a long and frequently contentious process. Disagreements started with whether a Yisker book should be written at all. For a variety of reasons, many Landsmannschaft members were resistant to the idea of a Yisker book. Some because of the painful memories it would inevitably bring to the surface, others on the grounds that it was time to stop crying about the war and start thinking about the future. Those in favor, however, saw the creation of a Yisker book as a life's mission. Undeterred, they coaxed and pressured their landsmen, frequently over a period of years, and in some cases, decades, pointing out that other towns already had Yisker books and that not having one was a pitiful reflection on their own community. We also learn from these introductions that Yisker book writers were plagued by feelings of intellectual insecurity. The shtetl had its intelligentsia, but its members were some of Hitler's first victims, and few had survived the war. So, ordinary Jews were the only Jews left. Their lack of educational pedigree was a source of terrible self-consciousness, so much so that many Yisker books open with apologies. And here is an apology. It's from a Yisker book published in 1957 for a town called Bolachov. Honorable reader, we ask your forgiveness for the material that is lacking in the historical section after the year 1900. To our great dismay, we were missing both oral and written sources. The chapters on experiences and folklore are not the fruits of the pen of professional, experienced writers. Rather, these are solely collections of memories and experiences, a slice of life in our city, of its people, happenings, struggles, desires, and aspirations. The Yiddish translation in the book is not uniform for two reasons. The translation was not done by one person, and number two, we wish to speak to the reader in simple Bolachov language. Despite its many gaps, may this book serve as a modest comfort for the natives of our city and our friends. Would it be that every person can find in it an echo of what was lost, and is no more? Gotta get a drink of water. Thank you, Al. So I was working on my project, Once There Was a Town, a question a lot of people asked me is a Yisker book an actual book? And the answer is yes. Most are typeset, hardcover books, privately published in either Yiddish or Hebrew, or a combination of both. I should add here that some Yisker books contain short English sections, which is really interesting because it's an indication that the writers were thinking ahead, that there might be a generation who wouldn't be able to understand the Yiddish, and they might wind up being assimilated Jews and English speakers. Yisker books are typically oversized with dark covers, the titles embossed in gold letters. In other words, these are books with a sense of both importance and permanence, written to be handed down as heirlooms one generation after another. So what we're looking at here is behind the desk at the New York Public Library, where the Yisker books are kept. And I'm fairly sure that many of these are the reprints that Sydney was mentioning earlier that are translated into English. So that's why they look to be sort of modern bound. They are, in fact, newly produced Yisker books. What you're looking at here, next image, what you're looking at here is an original Yisker book drawing called My Shtetl is Burning. The image comes from a Yisker book for a town called Lubomel in what used to be Eastern Poland, now Ukraine. It was published in 1975, so relatively late, and then republished in English, in an English edition in 1997. So what year? Oh, go back 1 second. This is the market square in Lubomel. And you'll see, if you look at the cover of my book, it's also the image on the jacket with the 3 little girls in front of it. So this is, well, you'll find out in a minute. So relatively late. Where am I? So it was published in 1975 and then republished in an English edition in 1997. Now, if it looks like this book, which is the Lubomel Yisker book, has 2 covers, it does have 2 covers. It kind of is a reversible book. One way it opens for the Hebrew Yiddish speaker, and then the other way it opens for English speakers. It also has, along with the 2 covers, 2 title pages. So you kind of get in it from both directions. So it happens that I am especially familiar with the Lubomel book because Lubomel is the place my family is from and where my father was born. It's a place I've been hearing stories about since I was a young kid, and ultimately, it's the place that led me to write a book about Yisker books. The first thing you see when you open the Lubomel Yisker book is a map. This is no ordinary map, but a map drawn post-Holocaust by a former resident. It's what's known as a memory map, and many Yisker books have them. Bear in mind that at the time this map was created, essentially nothing of what you see represented here survived the war. Buildings that had served any kind of Jewish use had been burnt or demolished. The tombstones in the cemetery had been uprooted and repurposed as paving stones. On the map, however, Jewish Lubomel is conjured back into existence, a feat of imagination representative of the entire Yisker book enterprise. So this is, we've zoomed into the center of the map because that's where all the central institutions of the town are located, including the marketplace, the synagogue, these littler synagogues known as shtetls. And also what's interesting, water pumps. In the shtetls, there were essentially no running water, and every town had a series of water pumps. Often there was one in the middle of the market square, and I found something fascinating in Yisker books is that there's a lot of material written about these pumps. They were kind of gathering spots where the dramas of daily life were played out, and you could do a whole book on the pumps of the shtetl, so that's a little detour. So for anyone new to the world of the shtetl, memory maps offer a shorthand introduction to its defining institutions. The synagogue, the study house, the public bathhouse, again, a necessity in towns that lacked indoor plumbing, the central marketplace and cemetery. A curious feature of this map is that only one of the town's businesses is represented by name. Can anyone make out that name? Sobel Machine Works, Mechanical Works. So why would just one business have a name? Any theories? That's it. It was Nathan Sobel is the guy who created the map. He's also a character in my book, a figure, not a character, as a person. And he was instrumental in bringing both this book and the English translation into the world. So a real kind of powerhouse of a person. The shtetl economy revolved around market day. Open-air bazaars held once or twice a week that brought together Jewish townspeople with Christian farmers in a day of buying and selling. On market day, normally quiet towns roared to life. Market squares that were usually empty were now filled to capacity, with both Jews and peasants all in different dress, speaking different languages, shouting their wares and bargaining at top volume. This is Lubumel also, by the way. The competition was fierce because every sale mattered. Shtetls had their elites, but for everyone else, the money earned on market day is what supported families for the rest of the week. And here we have two, it's not clear exactly if these are market shoppers or market vendors, but wonderful faces and baskets, so gives you the feeling of the people that you would see on market day. Poverty was one factor behind the provisional quality of shtetl life. The other was persecution. For a Jew, a mostly hated minority, you never knew when a young anti-Semite would pick up a stone and throw it in your direction. Or worse, when the local priest would start a rumor that a Jew had killed a Christian child. That was the kind of talk that led to pogroms, which were these violent mob attacks perpetrated against both Jewish businesses and the Jews themselves, sometimes with deadly outcomes. Gray, oppressive, precarious. These are some of the words used by Yisker book writers to describe their lives in the shtetl. At the same time, shtetl dwellers found ways to tolerate what was an often bleak existence and even transcend it. And that's what I'd like to talk about now. Storytelling. Storytelling in the shtetl was enjoyed by men and women, young and old, distinguished rabbis, and humble tradespeople. In other words, everyone. Stories were told at home and at work, in schools, taverns, and in the shtetl's bet midrash, or study house. And the study house, I should point out, was it was a public building. It was used mainly by men in the community, and it's where you went to read Torah, to study script, the Holy Scripture, or sometimes just to meet up. And, well, as you'll see, it was a very important storytelling venue. Open day and night, the study house was frequented mostly by men, either for prayer or for the reading of Torah, but it also served other functions. In a part of the world where winters were cold and dark, the study house was bright and warm, heat provided by a huge masonry stove that took up nearly an entire wall. And it was that area in front of the stove where stories were told. Prime time for storytelling was late afternoon, early twilight. As the sun set on another day and darkness loomed, a well-told tale had the power to fend off melancholy. Or it could mirror the feelings of despair that everyone experiences, or in the hands of a gifted narrator, it could do both. The home was another storytelling hub. The home oven was another storytelling hub, this one for women. In winter, neighbors gathered in each other's kitchens to help with jobs that needed more than one set of hands, like grating potatoes for Hanukkah latkes or plucking feathers for bedding. It would be goose feathers for the rich, chicken feathers for the poor. To pass the time while they worked, the women told stories, many involving supernatural beings like demons that could turn themselves into goats, or ghosts that prayed at night in the local cemetery, or witches that could move whole bodies of water. After the war, this huge body of stories, passed down orally from generation to generation, was at risk of being lost. Yisker book authors who saw these tales as part of their cultural inheritance would prevent that from ever happening by committing them to writing. And you will find tons of these stories in Yisker books, many of them kind of crazy, fanciful, magical, holy men, quite folkloric, and fun to read. The stories recorded in Yisker books are typically grouped together under the heading folklore. How shtetl Jews came to see themselves as producers of a folk culture is a story I tell in the book, and it's a little involved, so I'm not going to go into it right now. But know that many Yisker books have these folklore sections. And what you'll find in these sections, along with the stories, are collections of superstitions, jokes, nicknames, and witty or clever sayings. And for fun, I just want to give you a sample of what a witty saying is in a shtetl. It fits like a hunchback fits a wall. It doesn't fit. Good Shabbos, goat. What are you doing here? And didn't climb, didn't fly. Not believable. And just to hear the music in that last saying in Yiddish, it would be nicht gesteugen, nicht geflogen. So you do lose something in the translation. There's a metaphor often referenced in Yisker books that compares this world, the world of the here and now, to a vestibule. There's a door in this vestibule, and on the other side of the door is a brightly lit banquet room, also known as the world to come. According to Jewish mystics, the vestibule is where we have to wait until the Messiah comes and the door will finally swing open, and the banquet will begin. On the Sabbath, it was thought that that door was cracked open just wide enough to emit a sliver of light. Shtetl Jews basked in its radiance. Excluding the shtetl's top 1%, people worked feverishly Sunday through Friday just to put food on the table and wood in the stove. On Friday afternoon, they took off their aprons, put down their tools, and closed their shops. Women did their Sabbath bathing on Thursday, so now it was the men's turn to visit the bathhouse and wash away the grayness of the work week. Everyone, including children, changed into their Sabbath best. Women lit the Sabbath candles, which you could see from the street, flickering through every window of every house. After 6 days of work and worry, calm settled over the shtetl, enveloping everything and everyone. During the work week, shtetl dwellers subsisted on a diet made up mostly of starch, black bread, porridge, and potatoes. These were the mundane foods of the here and now, the foods that we eat while we're in the vestibule. Sabbath foods were a preview of the menu waiting for all good Jews in the world to come. So these were the foods on the other side of that door, the foods in the banquet room. Taken as a group, Sabbath foods shared certain characteristics. Challah, gefilte fish, and simmis. Would anyone like to define simmis? Again? That's a kugel. No? A simmis? Yeah. So it's like a roasted carrots, and it's often with prunes. And sweet potatoes, is that what you were saying? Yeah. Okay, got it. So these are the sweet foods. They brought sweetness to the Sabbath table. What people craved most, however, was fat. Stuffed derma, intestine, kishke, filled with a mix of flour and chicken fat, or schmaltz, chicken liver enriched with onions, fried in schmaltz, and kugel, a kind of casserole made with grated potatoes, onion, and schmaltz, all baked in the oven until the top, getting hungry, till the top is crispy and brown, and the interior is soft and luscious. Yisker books have a lot to say on the subject of kugel, both the actual food and what it symbolized. Here's a sample. Sorry. The kugel played a great role in the life of the Jews. No wonder that there were so many proverbs about the kugel. When the kugel was not so successful, it was said that we rejoiced with him like a bad kugel. Another expression, if you do not eat kugel for Shabbos, you will go hungry all week. Every story that was told had to have the following epilogue. Though they have it good, we have it even better. They eat kugel with their hands. We eat kugel with the tip of the knife. Kugel was the expression of the greatest well-being. If you said of someone that he eats kugel in the middle of the week, you are saying that things couldn't be better for him. So, it only makes sense that a culture which equates foods like kugel with the greatest well-being would also provide cures for indigestion. To help the food go down in peace, Sabbath lunch was followed by a trip to the seltzer stand, which in turn was followed by a mandatory Sabbath nap. Rested and refreshed, now it was time to go strolling. A leisurely Sabbath stroll was a tradition enjoyed by people of all social ranks. The town rabbis might go strolling together in their best silk coats. Married couples strolled up and down the shtetl's main streets, sometimes for hours, cracking sunflower seeds in their teeth as they walked. Young people strolled beyond town into the surrounding fields and forests, taking time, of course, to admire the beauty of God's creation. However, they also admired each other. Though unmarried men and women strolled in groups, occasionally a couple would peel off into the trees for a few minutes of privacy, a precious commodity in towns where neighbors kept close tabs on each other and everyone knew everyone's business. During the interwar years, so these are the 1920s and 30s, young people with the same political loyalties tended to stroll together. What you're looking at here are some of the youth movements. Many of them were Zionist movements, and there were all different forms of Zionism. Others, I think, like this one, looks to be a sports club. The one on the top is Betar? The one on the top, Betar, was a far right-wing Zionist group, sort of with military leanings, paramilitary. One of those people who joined these clubs was my great-uncle Nathan. Like other 20-somethings, my uncle had rejected traditional Judaism with its 613 laws. So far as he could see, religious observance had done nothing for the Jews. If they wanted redemption, if they wanted a place at the banquet table, they would have to fight for it, which is why he signed on with Betar, this right-wing Zionist youth group in which he was a junior commander. Betar was just one of that era's many Jewish youth movements, each with its own vision of the future. Even in a town like Lubamo, roughly 4,000 Jews, you would have found Zionists of every ideological flavor: Marxist, centrist, religious, revisionist, along with anti-Zionists like the Bund, a communist workers' party which advocated for a Jewish home in the diaspora, meaning in Eastern Europe. Whatever their beliefs, Saturday afternoons, the men and women who belonged to these groups took afternoon strolls into nature. When it started getting dark, they lit campfires and formed circles, singing political anthems or practicing Israeli folk dances. Sabbath was a day of regeneration, both physical and spiritual, and strolling was a source of both. My family. My grandmother, my 3 great uncles, my aunt, and my father were all born in Lubamo. My father, his sister, and mother emigrated to this country in the fall of 1938 on one of the last ships out of Poland. Today, almost all of my Lubamo relatives are gone. However, there happens to be a longevity gene on that side of the family, so until fairly recently, my aunt and my father were still sharing their Lubamo stories with me. And in fact, some I heard for the first time while I was writing this book. Last fall, I lost my aunt at 98 years old. The night of her funeral, my father had a dream. He was up in his apartment, and Luba, his sister, was downstairs waiting in a taxi to take them to the airport. So I heard this dream, and I knew what it meant. My father, the last of my Lubomel relatives, is ready to follow his sister. I tell this story because what's happening in my family is happening on a societal scale. The world is about to lose the last generation of shtetl Jews. Their stories, however, will endure, preserved through the medium of Yisker books. Of course, stories preserved in writing are as good as lost if no one reads them, which means now the responsibility is ours. Thank you. I would love to hear if anyone has a question or comment.
Specific to Lubomel,
Yeah.
on the maps you had up there, do you know where the ghetto was in some of these shtetls? I think in a lot of the shtetls, the Germans had Jewish ghettos.
Yeah, I mean, it was toward the center of town, and I think what happened from reading the Yisker book is that essentially the entire town was crowded into 2 streets. So it was a very small ghetto, and small and overcrowded. I can do some research on that and give you the street names, because I do think that they're mentioned in the Yisker book. Yeah. Well, it was it was 90% Jewish, some Polish, and some Ukrainian. So the Poles were more the businessmen in town. The Ukrainians were more farmers in the surrounding countryside. Yeah. What would be the I think the closest major town was Lutsk, which is about a 2-hour drive. I've been to Lutsk and I've been to Lubomel, and Lutsk was considered like a provincial city. Yeah.
Are there connections between these folktales and Hasidic folktales within the town, or they're just, because folktales are so significant for Hasidic?
Yeah, so the question was, is there a connection between Hasidic folktales and the folktales that were told in these towns? Yeah, they were, yes. I mean, a lot of the tales came out of the Hasidic story tradition, and many of them involved religious moral messages and built on themes and images and animals, and that would have been important and would have meant something in the world of the Chassid. So yes, there's a lot of overlap.
Elie Wiesel's on Fire reminds me a bit of this.
Oh, okay.
Because the book is about perhaps you read, I don't know if you read it, but this preservation of these Hasidic folktales.
Yeah.
His grandfather told him that were present in his town before.
Yes, yeah, it's all mixed in there.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. I have a question about what after the war, and people were trying to figure out, is my family, is anybody in my family still alive? I'm just curious, the concept of a Yisker book, I can only refer to it, reflect on it based on the synagogue I belong to, and most synagogues create a Yisker book once a year for the high holy days, right? And basically the only thing that goes in there is the name of the person and who's remembering them. And I'm just wondering, did they try to do anything to put together Yisker books once, the war ended, years later, did anything like that happen?
To put together Yisker books that have a list of
Yeah.
of the deceased?
Yeah, by the different towns.
Yeah, I think I mentioned it, I'm not 100% sure, but it's that list called the necrology, and it's part of every Yisker book, and it's a list of all of the victims, or the martyrs, you can use different language, But yes, and these lists are in themselves very interesting. They're all arranged differently. Some are alphabetical, some are by household, some don't give the women's names, just the man of the house, and it'll say man of the house, wife, 4 children. So you learn a lot about gender expectations and about the sociology of the family from looking at these lists. And putting together those lists was, it was considered a religious act, because if you left someone out, you were consigning them to oblivion. To have their name on the list, they would be remembered. So you were performing a real mitzvah for that person. Yeah.
So you talked about how there was friction between some of the bondsmen, mostly in the U.S., I think,
Yeah.
about whether or not to create the yizkor book.
Right.
Do you know, like, the stats on the amount of shtetls that there were and, like, what percent ended up producing a yizkor book?
There were, there were thousands and thousands of shtetls. I don't know what 3,000, 4,000. There were over 1,000 Yisker books. The current estimate is actually now approaching 1,500. So a lot did in the end. But if you read these introductions, you see how much pushback there was. There was also financial concerns. How are we going to raise the money? Who's going to do all the work? We have to earn a living. So there were practical concerns, and then there were the emotional concerns, and then there were more sort of philosophical concerns regarding look forward, don't look backwards.